Hi, my name is Mark, and I'm a serial hobbyist. At the core of my being is a need to learn new things, almost to an obsessive extent.
Almost.
Once a niche gets its greedy claws into me, I go into research mode for months until I finally sort of graduate into a full-blown hobby. Now, unlike a lot of my fellow serial hobbyists, I don't completely drop the hobby at some point, but it will kind of tone down a little bit, but it becomes just part of my long-term set of interests. Just some of my hobbies over the years include herpetology, drumming, home theater, video games, cast iron restoration, tattoos, barbecue, cycling, custom keyboards, and kids. But before you criticize me too heavily, keep in mind, how do you think I got into woodworking? And my most recent obsession? Houseplants. And I think I come by it honestly. I mean, look at this old photo of my parents' houseplant. So clearly having a green thumb runs in my family. Anyway, after setting up my home office recently, which became a whole nother obsession, after it was done I decided I need a little bit of greenery in that space. So I bought a houseplant. That led to picking up a few more, then a few more. And now I'm spending my spare time watching plant YouTubers and walking around my house with a light meter like some kind of maniac. So with the plants adding up, I decided I really needed a plant stand. I like the look of this one on Wayfair, and I'm sure it'll work just fine. But another one of my hobbies, which I'm sure you share with me, is building things for more time and money than it would have cost me just to buy one. So I guess I'm making one. And in the end, the one that I make should hold up longer and hopefully look better. So here's my version of a simple plant stand. It's made from walnut and maple and features sapwood in the vertical posts just for some visual fun. And here's how I made it. Wayfair was kind enough to publish some dimensions, and being somewhat new to plants, I honestly wasn't sure what I would need in terms of dimensions, so I used theirs as a starting point. In SketchUp, I drafted up my version, including lots of half-lap joints and tons of slats. As we get started here, I just want to talk a little bit about borrowing inspiration. I think it is perfectly reasonable to borrow inspiration from other sources. I do it all the time. I know some people fancy themselves true designers and can come up with new and novel ideas for everything they build. That's just not me. Sometimes you just want a thing and you shouldn't feel like you need to reinvent the wheel. So I like to take heavy inspiration and put my own spin on it. Of course, I also try to credit my inspiration whenever it makes sense to. To get that sapwood pattern that I'm after, I'll lay out the rails on some 4/4 live edge walnut slabs. We'll need 4 of these in total. I'm careful to pick portions of the board that have wavy but mostly straight sapwood. The interior portions of these slabs won't go to waste. We'll use them as material for the rails. The parts are all milled to a final thickness of 3/4 of an inch. A quick rip at the table saw, a little choppy chop at the miter saw, and we're ready to talk joinery. Since the half laps are wider than 3/4 of an inch, I set the dado stack up to the max, which is 3/4 of an inch, and plan on taking multiple passes. But first, we need to get the blade height set. The best way I know to do this is with scrap, sneaking up on the fit. And don't make the mistake of holding the two pieces together with your hands, as that won't usually give you a true test. Use a clamp instead, since that's how you'll be assembling them later. Once they're perfectly flush with the clamp engaged, we'll lock that setting in for the duration of the joinery cuts. We're going to start by cutting the half laps into horizontal rail pieces. While the positions change slightly depending on which shelf we're working on, the width of the half lap will be a constant at 2 inches, which is the width of our vertical pieces that they'll intersect with. So in order to make this repeatable, I'm going to use a piece of scrap as a spacer. The process goes like this. The first cut is right on my line using the fence and an 1.25 inch spacer. Next, with the spacer removed, I'll make the other end cut to establish the extremities of the half lap. Now I can just clean out the crap in the middle. And this is really the fit we want. Now we only need to know the positions of the half laps, and we can use our spacer to make sure that they are the perfect width every time. Now, even as the person who designed this thing, I still have to print out a diagram and make careful marks so that I don't get confused. All I really need to know is the approximate location, because with every measurement, I'll make the same cut on every rail that needs that cut. So even if I'm a little bit off from the plan, I'll be perfectly consistent between all of my rails. And of course, that spacer takes the guesswork out of sizing the actual half lap. Goldie Wilson likes the sound of that. Now the bottom rail that sits on the floor is the only one that doesn't share measurements with the other rails other than the distance between the two verticals. And that's a super critical thing to get right at this point, since it has to match the upper rails exactly or things won't assemble correctly. So I'll actually use one of my upper rails for reference. And ideally, the spacing between the half laps will match up nicely as they do here. Now the cuts we need to make in the vertical pieces are a little bit more varied, and most are narrower, so I'll carefully mark them out with the help of my assistant,
Trying to work here, bro.
who's flaunting his best feature.
Ooh, look at my fancy butthole.
The one at the top is flush with the ends, so no need for a fancy spacer for that. We'll just sneak up on the perfect fence position and then cut all 4 verticals at the top. For the shelves in the middle, we're making very similar cuts to what we did on our rails, only with a smaller spacer to accommodate the smaller 1.5" wide rails. And for the bottom shelf, we're going for a full 2 inches wide, since the bottom rails are also 2 inches wide. So now I'm going to lay out my parts and compare them to my drawing just for a sanity check. It's also a good time to lay out the grooves for the slats, as well as the little decorative dog ear cuts that we're going to make on the ends of the rails. For the grooves, I'll use my square tooth blade and make the groove in 2 passes. I'll just make a single pass on all the pieces, then nudge the fence over and make a follow-up second pass. The decorative cuts are made at 45 degrees. Now we can pivot to the slats. Here's a warning, not only for this project, but any project featuring slats. Slats suck. I mean, 5 slats, 10 slats, heck, 20 slats, no problem. But 45 slats, no matter what we plan to do with them, it's gonna be tedious. Whose idea was this anyway? Thankfully, I have a drum sander, so I'll use that to clean up the parts and bring them down to a 1/4 inch. I could then trim them to width at the table saw. The final treatment is a random orbit sanding, and because I obviously hate myself, a little hand sanding. With 2 faces per slat, that's 90 faces. Oh, and we can't leave those edges all sharp and pedestrian looking, so I'll break the edge with a tiny plane and some hand sanding. 4 edges per slat means 180 edges. Boy, do I need to find a hobby. To help ease the snug-fitting joinery, I'll use a chisel to break the hidden edges of the joint ever so slightly. This just prevents the corner from snapping off during assembly.
Hi. Don't you push it.
And I'd say it's a good time for a test fit before moving to the final assembly. With glue on both sides of the joint, I tap the pieces together and then add clamping pressure. After the glue dries, I sand the frame smooth and try not to own up to the fact that I glued my bottom rails on upside down. If you don't tell anyone, I won't. At this point, I'm actually starting to doubt the overall stability of this thing. I mean, it clearly doesn't bother Wayfair, but I'm not Wayfair. I'm Spagfair. And I feel like this thing needs a little help, so I decided to add additional supports that run front to back. Honestly, I do think these are optional, since after the glue up, the structure will stiffen significantly, but I'm a belt, suspenders, and elastic waistband sort of guy. I'm obviously using the domino here, but a dowel or pocket screws would work just as well. I plan to pre-finish this piece, so now's a good time to add any roundovers and finishing touches. I'll finesse all the edges with my backside. Backside sandpaper, that is. I have some leftover lacquer from my brother's desk project, so I'll use that as my finish for the frame. For the slats, I really want something that's going to stay white, keeping that blonde look of the maple. General Finishes High Performance should do the trick. I decided to speed things up a bit by rolling the finish on. Once the slats are dry, I'll make some notches that are needed in the slats that live near the verticals. For the final assembly, I'll use epoxy. I really need all the working time I can get on this one. I honestly tried to think of ways to assemble this thing in stages and just couldn't get there. So I'm doing it all at once with the help of some small scraps cut to length that fits between each one of the slats. I'll just pop them in as needed as I move through each shelf.
I hate this. Just letting you know. I hate it. Next time I do a project with slats, Todd, can you send me a remote kick in the balls?
Now, mommy, daddy button.
Because this sucks.
Now here's where things are going to be a little bit less than fun. The best way I know to approach this is to start on one side, seat all of the slats, and start applying clamping pressure or weight to help prevent those pieces from popping back out. If you don't do this, you're never really going to get them all to drop into their grooves, and tapping on one end will inevitably cause the other end to raise up and the slats will pop out. I like this project, and it's easy to make in theory, but in actual execution, it's kind of a pain in the butt. So if you want to build this one, you've been warned. But I wasn't totally satisfied with this, so I brought it home, loaded it up with plants, and mulled over how I might make a second version that would be even sturdier with a more straightforward construction and assembly method. So I went back to the drawing board and made a second version, but I didn't stop at version 2.
Turd burger!
I had even more improvements that I wanted to include and ultimately ended up with a version 3, which I think is the best of them all. And because lots of folks requested it, I'm offering that one up as a Wood Whisperer Guild course, which you can pre-order right now. The course launches on May 31st, and that's when the price goes up, so get your pre-order in now and save. As with all Guild courses, you'll not only receive plans, a cut list, and extensive video instruction, you'll also become a member of our awesome community, where you could trade tips and tricks with your fellow Guild members, and even make use of our extensive discounts with high-quality vendors. Check it out at thewoodwhispererguild.com. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, how about hitting that like button and double-checking to see that you're subscribed. Don't be a stranger. Here we go.
Hey, I did it, Todd. I'm getting better at this.
Hi.
That didn't come out right.
I wasn't. Where are you going? Jeez. I wasn't even thinking of a couch.
I'm recording all of this, by the way.
Good. Then I can prove to the court how stinky and shitty I am.
Prove to the court. You're the best, Mateo.
You dropped your cheese.
Not on the Felder, huh?
Welcome to Mark's Plant Stand Emporium, the largest selection of plant stands in the Midwest. Ugh, what happened to me?